Imagine wading into a warm, muddy river in the Amazon. The water is the color of strong tea, so cloudy you cannot see your own knees. Somewhere nearby, sliding through that darkness, is a long, dull-looking fish that seems almost too plain to notice. And yet that unremarkable animal is carrying, inside its own body, enough electricity to light a row of bulbs, to knock a full-grown horse off its feet, to stun a person in an instant. It is a living battery with a heartbeat. And the truly astonishing part is not just that it makes electricity, but how it does it, using thousands of tiny biological cells stacked together exactly the way engineers would stack cells in a battery, except this design came first, by millions of years. This is the story of the electric eel, and how a soft-bodied fish learned to generate up to 600 volts, and sometimes even more. By the end, you will understand not only how the shock is built, cell by cell, but why this one strange animal quietly helped humans invent the battery, and why it is still teaching us about the electricity running through our own bodies right now. Let's start with the first surprise, the one hidden in the name. The electric eel is not an eel. Despite the long snaking shape, it is not related to true eels at all. It is a knifefish, a close cousin of the carp and the catfish, and it just happens to have evolved a long, tapering body that looks eel-like. That body shape is not an accident. It is the key to everything, because almost the entire length of this fish, roughly 4/5 of it, is not muscle or gut or bone. It is a specialized electric organ. The vital organs, the heart, the stomach, everything needed to stay alive are all crammed into a small space just behind the head. The rest of that long tail is essentially a power plant. Now, how do you build a power plant out of living tissue? The answer is one of the most elegant tricks in all of biology, and it comes down to a special kind of cell called an electrocyte. An electrocyte is a modified muscle cell. It has given up on the job of moving the body and taken up a different job entirely, storing and releasing electric charge. On its own, a single electrocyte is almost laughably weak. When it fires, it produces only about 1/10 of a volt, roughly 1/7 of the voltage in a single small household battery. That is nothing. You would never feel it. But here is the secret. The electric eel does not have one electrocyte. It has thousands upon thousands of them, and they are stacked end to end in long columns that run down the body, like coins in a very long roll. And when cells are lined up like that, connected in a row, their voltages do not just sit there separately, they add together. This is exactly the principle behind an ordinary battery. Stack more cells in a line, in what engineers call a series, and the voltage climbs and climbs. In the eel, with several thousand electrocytes wired in series, each contributing its tiny fraction of a volt, the total can reach 500, 600, in the strongest individuals, even higher. A fish running on the same rule that governs the batteries in your remote control. But a stack of charged cells is useless if they all fire at random moments. The real magic, the thing that turns a pile of biological batteries into a weapon, is timing. Every one of those thousands of cells has to discharge in almost the exact same instant, so that all their little voltages pile up at once instead of leaking away one by one. And the electric eel does this through its nervous system with breathtaking precision. Each electrocyte is wired to a nerve. When the eel decides to fire, a command races out from its brain along those nerves. The eel's body carefully adjusts the length of each nerve path so that the signal, even though it starts from different distances, arrives at every single cell at the same moment. All the electrocytes flip their charge together in a wave that sweeps the length of the body in a fraction of 1,000th of a second. Thousands of tiny voltages snapping into alignment, adding into one enormous jolt. It is less like a fish and more like an orchestra, where thousands of players hit one note at precisely the same instant, and the sound that comes out is a wall of pure electricity. And here is something most people never realize. The electric eel does not have just one kind of shock. It has two completely different electric abilities, and it uses them for completely different jobs. The first is a low voltage signal, gentle little pulses, only a few volts, that the eel gives off almost constantly. This is not a weapon at all, it is a sense. Remember, this fish lives in water so murky that eyes are nearly worthless. So instead of relying on sight, the eel releases a steady, weak electric field around its body and then feels how that field is distorted by objects nearby. A rock, a plant, another fish. Each one bends the electric field in a slightly different way, and the eel reads those distortions like a kind of electrical radar. It is quite literally seeing the world with electricity, building a map of the black water out of ripples in an invisible field. This gentle sense also lets electric eels signal to one another in the dark, a private language written in pulses. The second ability is the one everybody has heard of, the high voltage discharge, the full 600-volt strike. And the way the eel uses it is far cleverer than just zapping whatever it bumps into. When an electric eel hunts, it goes hunting in that same murky darkness where it can barely see. Imagine trying to catch a small fish you cannot even find, one hiding perfectly still among the weeds. The eel has a remarkable solution. It sends out a pair of quick, high-voltage pulses. Those pulses race through the water and reach the hidden prey. And here is the eerie part. The electricity does not just hurt the prey. It reaches into the prey's own nervous system and forces its muscles to contract, whether the prey wants them to or not. A hidden fish that was holding perfectly still suddenly twitches involuntarily because the eel's electricity has effectively hijacked its body. And that tiny twitch, that flick of a fin the prey never chose to make, sends a little ripple through the water that the eel instantly detects. In other words, the eel uses electricity like a remote control, forcing a hidden animal to reveal its own location. This astonishing behavior was carefully documented by the biologist Kenneth Catania, who showed again and again that the eel is doing exactly this, using its shock not only to attack, but to find prey that is trying to disappear. Then comes the full strike. Once the eel knows where its target is, it unleashes a volley of high-voltage discharges. This burst does something almost unfair. It floods the prey's nervous system so completely that the animal's muscles lock up and it is paralyzed, frozen in place, unable to flee. Sometimes the eel even curls its body into a horseshoe, bringing its head and tail closer together so that the positive and negative ends of its living battery are on either side of the prey, concentrating the shock like squeezing a target between the two poles. Only then, with its meal stunned and helpless, does the eel move in and swallow it whole. The whole sequence, from the first probing pulse to the final paralyzing burst, can happen in a fraction of a second. And now the question almost everyone asks. If the eel is generating 600 volts inside its own body, why on earth does it not electrocute itself? Part of the answer is simple insulation. The eel's vital organs are packed into that small region behind the head, well away from the main electric organ, and they are wrapped in fatty tissue and other protective layers that help shield them. The eel is also a large animal, and much of the current it produces flows outward into the surrounding water rather than looping back through its own core. On top of that, the eel appears to have some tolerance to its own discharges. It is not that the electricity magically avoids the eel, it is that the eel is built, laid out, and insulated so that the worst of the shock passes out into the water and into the prey, not into the parts of itself that matter most. It is not perfectly immune. A large discharge does pass some current through its own body, but its design keeps that from being fatal. There is one more behavior that is almost hard to believe, and it too was carefully studied by Catania. When an electric eel feels genuinely threatened by something too big to eat, a large animal wading in the shallows, for example, it does not just shock through the water and hope for the best. In shallow water, electricity spreads out and weakens fast, so the eel does something extraordinary. It launches itself up out of the water, presses the underside of its head directly against the threat, and delivers its discharge straight into the body of the intruder. By leaping up and making direct contact, The eel turns its own head into the tip of a live wire, sending the current straight into the target instead of letting it dissipate. It is a defensive strike, aimed and delivered with startling purpose, and it can be powerful enough to drive a large animal back out of the water entirely. Step back for a moment and think about what this animal really is. It is a fish that has turned much of its body into a battery that fires thousands of cells in perfect synchrony, that carries two separate electrical systems, one to see and one to strike, that can reach into another creature's nervous system and take control of its muscles, and that can leap from the water to deliver a shock like a living taser. All of it evolved slowly over millions of years, long before any human ever thought about electricity. And that connection to us is deeper than it looks. Back in the 1700s, when scientists were only beginning to understand electricity, animals like the electric eel and its relative the torpedo ray were living proof that electricity was not just a strange laboratory spark, but something that living bodies could generate on their own. Studying these creatures helped inspire the pioneers of electrical science. The very word we use, the idea of an electric organ made of stacked cells, fed directly into the invention of the first true battery, a stack of alternating metal discs that mimicked in metal what the eel had been doing in flesh all along. In a very real sense, this humble Amazon fish sits near the origin of the battery that powers the device you are watching this on right now. And the story is not finished. Even today, researchers study the electric eel's electrocytes to understand how living cells move charge, how nerves and muscles run on tiny electrical signals, the very same kind of signals firing in your own heart and brain at this exact moment. Some scientists are even looking at the eel's design as inspiration for new kinds of soft, flexible biological batteries, power sources that could one day run tiny medical implants using the body's own salts and fluids, exactly the way the eel does. So the next time you picture that plain, dull fish gliding through a muddy river, remember what it really is: a living power plant, running on the same rule as every battery you own, quietly generating 600 volts in the dark and hiding, inside its long grey body, one of the oldest and most elegant electrical inventions on Earth. So here is what we would love to know from you. Which part amazed you the most? The way thousands of cells fire in the same split second, the way the eel takes over its prey's muscles from a distance, or the leap out of the water to strike a threat head-on? Tell us in the comments. And if this changed the way you think about the quiet electricity running through every living thing, including you, stay with us. Because the natural world is full of impossible sounding things that turn out to be completely true.